The night my mother stole a $45,000 ring from my dead grandmother's locked vanity. A ring that was legally notarized and explicitly mine. She made one catastrophic miscalculation. She assumed that because I had spent 2 years quietly surviving the worst grief of my life, I had forgotten how to fight. She handed that ring to my 27-year-old brother so he could slide it onto his fiancée's finger on a highly produced Instagram reel that 300 people watched before I did. She had let herself into the estate property with a spare key, removed an inventoried heirloom from a locked mahogany vanity, and handed it off with the casual authority of a woman who has never once been told that her decisions have a limit. And then, in the specific arrogance of a woman who has never once been held accountable for anything in her adult life, she sent me a text message, in writing, time-stamped, auto-backed up to her carrier's cloud, confessing to exactly what she had done and exactly why she decided I did not deserve my own inheritance. That text message cost her $300,000 in lost estate inheritance, her home equity, $35,000 in criminal defense attorney fees, a guilty plea on a Class C felony charge, a suspended sentence, a criminal record, and the 30 years of social standing she had spent her entire adult life constructing at considerable expense and effort. On the evening it all came apart, I sat perfectly still at a $15,000 engagement dinner surrounded by 50 witnesses, pressed one button on my phone, placed a $100 bill on the table for my meal, and walked out without raising my voice a single time. My mother thought that grief had made me fragile. Grief made me methodical. And this is exactly how it happened. Let me tell you about my grandmother's ring before I tell you what was done with it, because the ring is not just the object at the center of this story. It is the evidence of a relationship, and understanding that relationship is what makes what Eleanor did so specifically, precisely vicious. My grandmother, I called her Gran, was a compact, opinionated, deeply unsentimental woman who had lived through more difficulty than she ever talked about and emerged from it with an absolute horror of self-pity and an equally absolute love of beautiful things. She had grown up with very little, married modestly, and spent her adult life building something solid through work and patience and the specific stubbornness of a woman who has decided that the world does not get to dictate her circumstances. By the time I knew her, she owned her home outright, kept a meticulous garden, and had one extravagance: her jewelry. Not flashy, not performative, precise. Everything she owned was chosen deliberately and cared for with the kind of attention most people reserve for living things. The holly ring was her masterpiece. She had it made in the early 1950s by a jeweler who has been dead for 30 years, which means there is no replacing it, not even with unlimited money. The center stone is an emerald-cut diamond, flanked on each side by 2 rubies set in a holly leaf formation. It sounds elaborate when you describe it, but it wears with total elegance. It looks like something that belongs to a particular woman and would not mean the same thing on anyone else. When the estate appraiser came through after Gran passed, he valued it at $45,000, and I remember thinking that number was simultaneously too high and completely inadequate, because no dollar figure accounts for the specific weight of a thing that has been on someone's hand for 60 years. Gran and I had a relationship that my mother Eleanor found baffling and vaguely offensive, because it was built on genuine affinity rather than performance. I drove 4 hours round trip to take Gran to her cardiology appointments. I was the one she called when she couldn't figure out her insurance portal. When she was in the hospital for 6 days in the winter of the year before she died, I was there on day 1, and I stayed until day 4 before work forced me home, and I drove back on day 6 when she was discharged. My brother Lucas, who lived 40 minutes from her house, sent flowers on day 3 with a card that was clearly typed by the florist's website. Gran knew this. She was not a sentimental woman, but she was a fair one, and she believed, in the very literal way of a certain generation, that effort should be rewarded and that what you leave behind should go to the people who showed up. So 3 years before she died, she sat me down in her kitchen, took the holly ring off her right hand, and held it out so I could see it properly in the light. She said, "On your 30th birthday, this is yours." She said, "I want you to have it because you are the one who came." She put it back on her hand and we drank tea and we talked about something else, and that was that. She formalized it in her will the following year. Her attorney drafted the language specifically. The ring was itemized by description, material, and appraised value, and named me as the sole recipient, to be delivered to me on or after my 30th birthday. The will was notarized. It was filed. It was legally airtight. I had a copy on my phone. When Gran passed, her estate went into probate. My great-uncle Marcus, Gran's younger brother, was named executor, a role he had held in theory for years and approached in practice with the thoroughness of a man who has spent 3 decades catching people who thought they were undetectable. He inventoried the house. He cataloged the assets. He filed the paperwork. My 30th birthday was 8 months away. Everything was in order. I was sitting in my apartment on a Tuesday evening in November when I saw the Instagram reel. It was one of those algorithmically boosted posts that surfaces on your feed because someone you follow has interacted with it. I want to tell you what my life looked like in that apartment at that point so you understand what Eleanor had decided to weaponize. 2 years prior, on December 23rd, my partner Daniel had been killed in a car accident on a highway that was more ice than road. We had been together for 4 years. We were not engaged yet. We had talked about it in the way that people talk about things they are certain of but in no particular hurry to formalize. He was 31. He was genuinely funny, not performed funny, and he cooked badly but enthusiastically, and he had very specific opinions about which hiking trails were worth the elevation and which ones were not. He is not reducible to a paragraph, and I will not try. What I will say is that December had not been December in the same way since, and I had been doing the specific unglamorous work of therapy and time that grief requires, and I was 2 years into it and making progress. Actual progress, not performed progress. I had a job I liked. I had friends who knew the situation and didn't make it precious. I had a quiet apartment and a manageable routine and the slow, undramatic reconstruction of a functional life. I was not fragile. I was not destroyed. I was in progress. Eleanor had looked at that progress and seen weakness. Lucas had posted a proposal video. It was professionally filmed. A string quartet, a small crowd of friends, Amy crying in that specific way of someone who has genuinely been surprised. And it was warm and romantic and exactly the kind of content that performs well on a Tuesday evening. And there, moving in slow motion in high definition, was my grandmother's holly ring sliding onto Amy's finger. The rubies. The emerald cut. The flanking leaf formation that no living jeweler had the pattern for. On Amy's hand. On Lucas's reel. On my phone screen. I put the phone face down. I sat for a moment. Then I picked it up and called Eleanor. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was the voice of a woman who has already prepared for this call and is not worried about it. I said, I saw the reel. She said, I know. No apology. No hesitation. I said, that ring was left to me in Grandma's will. You know that, Eleanor. I have called my mother by her first name since I was 25. A choice she has never forgiven, and that communicates, every time I use it, exactly where the boundary is. She exhaled. Not with guilt. With the specific breath of someone who has already composed their argument and is mildly impatient to deliver it. Chloe, she said. You lost Daniel 2 Christmases ago. You have told everyone in this family that you hate the holidays now. You're in therapy. You cry at Christmas carols. That ring has holly on it. It is a Christmas ring. The absolute last thing you need is to look at Christmas holly on your hand every single day and be pulled straight back to that accident. Amy loves Christmas. Lucas needed a ring. He couldn't afford one, and Amy's family is well off, and he needed to propose properly. So I made a decision. The ring went to the couple who will actually wear it and build something with it, not to someone who is going to put it in a drawer because it reminds her of a car crash. And then she said, it's just jewelry. Let it go. I want you to sit with what she did there. She took 2 years of genuine clinical therapeutic work that I had done to survive the worst thing that has ever happened to me, The loss of my partner Daniel in a holiday car accident on December 23, 2 years prior, and she used it as a legal brief. She filed my grief as evidence of my incompetence. She decided, without asking me, without consulting the estate attorney, without consulting Uncle Marcus, without consulting anyone except her own reflection, that my trauma made me undeserving of an inheritance that a notarized legal document had already assigned to me. She repackaged theft as compassion. She cast herself as the thoughtful mother making a difficult but necessary decision for the good of the family. And she did it from the position of absolute certainty that I was too depleted to do anything about it. I said, "I see." And I hung up. I sat in my apartment, dim and quiet, the way I kept it, the way I had come to understand that quiet was not the same thing as defeat, and I felt something settle into place behind my sternum. Something cold. Something that required no emotion to sustain. I opened my contacts, scrolled to Marcus, and looked at his number for about 30 seconds. If you are the person in your family who does all the work and absorbs all the weight and gets handed "you're strong, you'll be fine," while someone else gets handed everything else, stay with me. Because what comes next is what happens when the person who has always been the pack mule finally finds out she has been carrying a legal hammer the whole time. To understand why Eleanor thought this was possible, why she believed she could reach into a dead woman's locked vanity, remove a legally bequeathed heirloom, hand it to her son, post a video about it on Instagram, and face no consequence whatsoever, you have to understand the specific architecture of how she operated. Eleanor is 58 years old. She is attractive in the precise, curated way of a woman for whom appearance is not vanity but strategy. Her home is immaculate. Her wardrobe is organized. Her country club membership is current, and her reputation there, built over 30 years of hosting fundraisers and chairing committees and performing the specific choreography of suburban social capital, was impeccable. Eleanor's entire identity was constructed on a single load-bearing idea, that she was a woman with a perfect family, and her family was evidence of her success as a person. This is why she needed Lucas to have a ring. Not because she loved him, though she did in the way that collectors love their best piece, but because Lucas's engagement to Amy Henderson was the social event she had been building toward for 2 years. The Hendersons were old money. Their social circle was the circle Eleanor had been adjacent to for decades and finally had a legitimate pathway into. Lucas marrying Amy was Eleanor's upgrade. The validation that all 30 years of country club membership and presentation and performance had been pointing toward. A proposal with a stunning vintage $45,000 ring was a far better story than, "My son bought a very nice solitaire from the mall." The ring was content. It was narrative. It was Eleanor's aesthetic, worn on Amy's hand, photographed at every subsequent family event. That is what this was about. Not love. Not family. Brand management. And Lucas. I say this not with cruelty but with precision. Lucas is a 27-year-old man who has never been allowed to develop the musculature of accountability because every consequence of his life has been padded by Eleanor before it could land. He had run through 3 jobs in 4 years, each exit engineered by Eleanor into a story about the toxic workplace or the bad boss or the industry downturn. He was carrying credit card debt he refused to acknowledge the specifics of, and his living situation, a nice apartment in a good neighborhood, was subsidized at a level he had never disclosed to Amy's family. He wanted to propose lavishly because he had never been taught that lavish things require resources, and he had never acquired resources because he had never been required to. Eleanor gave him the ring the same way she had given him everything else, by removing the obstacle so he wouldn't have to learn to climb it. And then Lucas made it personal. 2 days after my call with Eleanor, 2 days after she had weaponized Daniel's death to justify taking my inheritance, I received a text from Lucas. He had never called to explain. Never reached out to acknowledge what had happened. Just silence and then this. "Chloe, I know you're upset but be real. You weren't going to wear a Christmas ring. You don't even do Christmas anymore. Amy wears it better anyway. Just be happy for us. Amy wears it better anyway." I read it twice. I took a screenshot. I put my phone face down and I sat with that sentence for a while. Not because it hurt me, because it didn't, not in the way he intended, but because it clarified something I needed clarified. Lucas was not an innocent bystander who had accepted a gift without thinking. He knew. He had known where the ring came from and had decided actively that his desire for a lavish proposal outweighed my legal right to my own grandmother's bequest. He had texted me not to apologize but to manage me, to deliver the family line and close the conversation before it could become inconvenient. Amy wears it better anyway. I added that screenshot to the folder with everything else. It would not appear in the demand letter. It was not evidence of the theft itself. But I kept it because some things deserve to be kept. There is a specific pattern with people like Eleanor. And I want to name it clearly because I think a lot of you who are still watching have lived inside a version of it. The pattern is this. She had never once been in a room where her emotional authority did not function. Every confrontation in her adult life had eventually bent to her because she controlled the social environment, the family narrative, the temperature of every room she entered. When people objected to Eleanor's decisions, she reframed the objection as the problem. The objector became difficult, irrational, ungrateful, or, in my case, fragile. She had been doing this for decades and it had worked every single time, which meant she had never developed a contingency for the situation where it stopped working. She had also never, in my memory, been in a room with a lawyer who did not represent her. Here is the part that should have been Eleanor's first alarm. She is not the executor of Gran's estate. She is a beneficiary. Her legal standing in the estate is as a recipient, not an administrator. She had no authority to make decisions about asset distribution. None. The authority sat entirely with Marcus, and Marcus had filed every document, logged every asset, and operated strictly by the letter of probate law. Eleanor had overridden the law not because she had the legal standing to do so, but because she had spent 58 years in a domestic context where her authority was treated as final, and she had confused that domestic authority with a kind of universal jurisdiction that extends even into courtrooms. She forgot Marcus. That was the fatal error. She forgot that there was a man in this situation who had no emotional investment in managing Eleanor's feelings, no history of yielding to her social pressure, and no mechanism by which she could reclassify his role. She could not make Marcus feel guilty. She could not invoke family loyalty with a man whose loyalty was to the law and to his dead sister's wishes. She could not host a dinner and outmaneuver a signed inventory. She could not reframe an inventory. She could not charm a Ring doorbell camera. She could not negotiate with her own time-stamped text message. She didn't even remember the inventory. That is how confident she was. I called Marcus at 6:45 the morning after Eleanor hung up on my silence. Marcus is 62. He spent 30 years as a forensic auditor. The specific kind of auditor that organizations hire when they believe someone inside has been stealing and they need it proven with the kind of rigor that holds up in court. He is not warm. He does not do small talk. He operates entirely in documented fact, and the emotional content of any situation is relevant to him only insofar as it explains motive, never as a reason to soften an outcome. When Gran named him executor, Marcus did not treat it as an honor. He treated it as a professional engagement. He went to Gran's house with a video camera, a clipboard, and a detailed room-by-room inventory template. He spent 6 hours on a Saturday, before Gran was in the ground while she was in hospice, walking through every room, opening every drawer, describing every item, and capturing it all in a time-stamped recording that he backed up in 3 places. Because that is what a competent executor does. And Marcus had not spent 30 years in forensic auditing to become the kind of executor who takes things on faith. The inventory was completed on October 19th. When I told him what I had seen on Instagram, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need you to text me a screenshot of the reel." I did. He was quiet for another 10 seconds. He said, "That ring is item 47 in the inventory." photographed in the locked vanity in the master bedroom on October 19th. It is currently not in that house. I said, "How do you know it's not in the house?" He said, "Because I checked the house on November 8th for an unrelated probate matter and the vanity was unlocked and the ring was not in it." I noted the discrepancy but did not yet know where it had gone. "I know now." Then he told me about the neighbor. An elderly woman who lives across the street from Gran's house had a Ring doorbell camera. She'd had it installed after a car was broken into on the block. Marcus had spoken to her in the first week of November about a different question, and in the course of that conversation she had mentioned seeing Eleanor letting herself in with the key on a recent afternoon. Marcus had, in his way, quietly noted this and obtained the footage, which showed Eleanor arriving at 2:14 p.m. on November 3rd and leaving at 2:47 p.m., carrying what the footage described, and what Marcus had documented in the inventory, as a medium-sized velvet drawstring pouch. He had already spoken to an attorney. The attorney had confirmed what Marcus already knew: removal of a catalogued estate asset by a beneficiary prior to lawful distribution constitutes theft of estate property. Given the appraised value of $45,000, it qualifies in our jurisdiction as grand larceny in the first degree. A Class C felony. Maximum sentence: 5 years. I want to pause here and acknowledge something, because if I were listening to this story I would be thinking it too. I know how fortunate this looks. A forensic auditor as executor. A video inventory already completed. A neighbor's Ring camera pointed at the right door. A will with a penalty clause. I know. I have thought about this myself. How differently this story ends if Gran had named anyone else as executor. If Marcus had not been the specific kind of man who spends his Saturdays doing inventory walkthroughs before being asked to. The honest answer is that it ends very differently. The ring stays on Amy's finger. Eleanor walks away clean. I am left with a notarized will and no mechanism to enforce it against a woman who took what she wanted and dared me to do something about it. The difference between justice and injustice in cases like this is often just one person in the right role at the right time. Gran put Marcus in that role. She knew exactly who he was. That was not luck. That was Gran. I want you to let that settle. Grand larceny. 5 years. For a ring Eleanor had decided she had the right to redistribute. Marcus then told me about the penalty clause. Gran's will, competently drafted by an estate attorney Gran had chosen specifically because he had a reputation for drafting documents that held up, contained a standard but devastating disinheritance provision. Any named beneficiary who attempted to defraud the estate, contest the will in bad faith, or interfere with the lawful distribution of assets would forfeit their entire inheritance share automatically upon documented proof of the interference. The language was unambiguous. Marcus's attorney confirmed it was enforceable as written and that Eleanor's actions met the definition of interference at minimum and theft at maximum. Eleanor was a named beneficiary. Her share, $300,000. Let me be absolute about that number. $300,000. Her share of her own mother's estate. The inheritance that Gran had spent decades building through work and patience and careful stewardship. Gone. Forfeit. The moment Eleanor used a spare key to take something that was not hers and it could be proven. And it could be proven. It was already proven. Marcus had the video. He had the inventory. He had the Ring doorbell footage. His attorney had reviewed the full package and used a phrase I wrote down in my notes. This is among the cleaner estate theft cases I have reviewed. I want you to sit with the full arithmetic for a moment. Eleanor had stolen a $45,000 ring to avoid Lucas spending money on a proposal, in the service of a $15,000 engagement dinner that was meant to cement her social position with Amy's wealthy family. The theft, now documented and prosecutable, would cost her $300,000 in forfeited inheritance, $35,000 in attorney fees to avoid prison on a Class C felony charge, and the loss of the social standing she had spent 30 years building. She had traded $335,000 and a clean record for the ability to tell a better story at a country club. She had bankrupted herself to stage manage her son's proposal. And she had done it with absolute certainty that the depleted, grieving woman sitting in a dim apartment was not going to do anything about it. I had the notarized will. I had the video inventory from October 19th. I had the Ring doorbell footage from November 3rd. I had a forensic auditor as executor who had already assembled the evidentiary package and whose attorney had reviewed every document and confirmed its legal sufficiency. What I did not yet have was Eleanor in writing, confirming that she had taken it and why. Because a text confession removes every possible avenue of defense. There is no misunderstanding. There is no, I found it somewhere. There is no, the family agreed. There is just her words, her timestamp, her number on a screen that can be screenshot, backed up, and printed on 8 pages of firm letterhead. And I knew exactly how to get it. There is a specific thing that happens with a certain kind of person when they believe they have won. The victory is not enough on its own. They need you to know they won. They need the final word. They need the defeated party to acknowledge the defeat so that the win feels complete. Eleanor had spent 58 years operating this way. She had never lost a family argument. She had never faced a consequence she couldn't manage. She had never encountered a situation she could not narrate into a version where she was correct. I spent 2 days writing the message. Not because the words were hard to find, I knew exactly what I was doing, but because every word needed to be precisely calibrated. Too angry and she would sense a fight and become guarded. Too formal and she would suspect something and call her attorney before I was ready. What I needed was surrender. Complete, specific, believable defeat. I needed to hand Eleanor the ending she had already written for me. This is what I sent her on November 6th at 7:22 p.m. Eleanor, I've been thinking about what you said. I know you think I've been struggling and I guess you're right that I'm not in a good place. I don't have the energy for a legal fight right now. I don't even know if I want to put Grandma's memory through that, dragging her estate into court and lawyers and all of it. I just need you to know that I thought that ring was mine. So, I thought Gran meant it for me. But maybe you made the right call. I'm just really tired and I don't know what I'm doing half the time anymore. I read it back 4 times. It was exactly right. Every sentence reinforced the version of me Eleanor had already decided was true. The depleted, passive, grief-fogged woman who would ultimately comply because compliance was less exhausting than resistance. I had written her the conclusion she wanted. She replied at 7:51 p.m. 29 minutes. I was watching the notification in real time. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, what kind of person puts that in writing? What kind of person confesses to theft in a text message? A narcissist who believes she has already won. People like Eleanor do not confess out of carelessness. They confess because a written record of their victory is part of the victory. She didn't just want to have taken the ring, she wanted me to have documentation of my own defeat. She wanted proof, in her own words, that she had assessed the situation and made the call and I had accepted it. She was not being reckless. She was being dominant. She just did not account for the fact that evidence of dominance and evidence of a felony are, in this specific case, the exact same document. This is what she wrote. I'm going to give you every word. Chloe. I took it because Lucas needed it more and you're too stuck in the past to appreciate it. That ring deserved to go to someone who is actually building a future, not sitting in a dark apartment reliving something you cannot change. Let it go. It's just jewelry. Move on. 7:52 p.m. Screenshot saved. 7:53 p.m. Forwarded to Marcus. 7:54 p.m. Emailed to myself, saved to Google Drive, saved to a second cloud backup. Marcus's attorney had the formal legal demand letter drafted within 5 business days. 8 pages, single-spaced, firm letterhead. It named the will provision, the inventory date, the Ring doorbell timestamp, the appraised value, and Eleanor's text confession. It cited 4 statutes. It demanded the rings return to Marcus within 30 days or Marcus would file a police report and initiate civil recovery proceedings. It was addressed to Eleanor, to Lucas, and to Amy. I now had 3 documents. The screenshot of the notarized will showing my name and the ring's precise description. Eleanor's text message, time-stamped November 6th at 7:51 p.m., in her own words on her own phone. The legal demand letter, 8 pages, citing grand larceny, signed by an attorney with 30 years of estate litigation behind his name. All I needed was the right room. Eleanor booked the room herself. On November 19th, driven by the specific need of a woman who has just secured a social victory and requires an audience for it, Eleanor reserved the Whitmore Country Club's private dining room for December 14th. The Whitmore is not a casual venue. It has a dress code in the confirmation email and a minimum spend per head. She booked it for 50 guests. She spent $15,000 on the venue, catering, floral arrangements, and the specific visual trimmings that communicate to a room full of country club members that the host is a woman of taste and means. She invited Amy's parents, Richard and Patricia Henderson, along with Amy's extended family, Eleanor's full country club circle, every relevant cousin and aunt and family associate, and Lucas's social group. And then she sent me a printed invitation. In an envelope. With a gold wax seal. She invited me to sit in that room and watch. I want you to appreciate the psychology of that invitation, because it is the most revealing thing Eleanor did in this entire sequence. She did not invite me out of kindness. She did not invite me because she felt guilty. She invited me because having me present, quiet, compliant there, completed the narrative. It confirmed the version of events where she had made a difficult but ultimately correct matriarchal decision. I had processed my objection and accepted it, and the family had moved forward under her management. She needed me in that room the way a stage director needs every actor in their blocking, because the scene doesn't read right with an empty chair. She expected me to sit quietly in the corner and perform submission. I RSVP'd yes. The 2 weeks between receiving that invitation and December 14th were the most operationally focused 2 weeks I have spent in my adult life. I cross-referenced Eleanor's RSVP email, which she had CC'd to her own address and accidentally included the full guest list in the thread, against every contact I could identify. I built the group chat over 3 evenings methodically the way Gran used to do her financial records. 1 column at a time, nothing skipped. I did not add Eleanor. I added every other person who would be in that room. Amy, Lucas, Richard Henderson, Patricia Henderson, Amy's aunt and uncle, Amy's college friends on the list, Eleanor's country club friends whose numbers I found through mutual social connections accumulated over a lifetime in the same community, our extended family, all 50 contacts verified against the guest list twice. I uploaded the 3 attachments and checked that all 3 opened cleanly on both iOS and Android. I verified that the will screenshot was legible, that my name and the ring's description were clearly visible, no cropping, no ambiguity. I verified that Eleanor's text message screenshot showed the full timestamp, the contact name, and the complete uncut message. I confirmed the demand letter was the final signed version. I wrote the message text and read it back 6 times over 2 separate evenings until every word was precise and nothing could be misread. Then I saved the unsent draft and did not open it again until December 14th. I told no one what I was planning. Not my therapist. Not my closest friends. Not Marcus, who knew what I had and trusted me to act appropriately when the time came. I carried it alone for 2 weeks, which was not as difficult as you might think because I had spent 2 years learning to carry things quietly without putting them down. The only difference between this and everything else I had carried was that this thing had a destination. The night before December 14th, I laid out what I was going to wear, set my alarm and went to sleep at 10 o'clock. No wine. 8 hours. Clean. If you have ever had to carry something this consequential in total silence, keeping every normal conversation entirely ordinary while something enormous sits in an unsent folder on your phone, You know, the specific calm of a person who has already done all the work and is simply waiting for the right moment to arrive. The Whitmore on December 14th was everything Eleanor had commissioned it to be. The private dining room had ivory linens and low candlelight, white flower arrangements with actual sprigs of holly tucked into the greenery. Eleanor's decorator had clearly leaned into the seasonal theme, which I noted with a very particular private awareness. The catering staff moved with the practiced quiet of a venue that has hosted this exact type of event several hundred times. The wine was good. The room was warm. 50 people dressed in the specific way of people who know what kind of room they are in. The women in jewel tones and classic cuts. The men in suits that fit properly, everyone performing their best version of themselves in the way that country club events demand. Amy's parents, the Hendersons, were exactly what their reputation suggested. Richard Henderson was a broad, unhurried man in his early 60s who carried the particular stillness of someone accustomed to being the most consequential person in any room. Patricia was warmly polished. They occupied the head table with Eleanor, Lucas, and Amy, and from the moment I arrived I watched Richard Henderson in the specific way you watch a man who you know is going to matter later. I arrived 7 minutes before dinner. I was wearing navy. I said the necessary hellos. I was seated at a table in the middle of the room, not at the front, not hidden in the back, but visible in the sight line of most of the space. I ordered still water. I ate the starter when it came. I participated in the table conversation in the minimal, functional way of someone who is saving their full attention for something else. I did not drink wine. Eleanor came to my table before I sat down. She put her hand on my arm and told me she was glad I had come, that she thought this would be good for me, that seeing the family celebrate would help me remember that life continues. She was performing warmth with the specific generosity of a woman who believes she has already won and can afford to be magnanimous. I told her the room was beautiful. I walked to my table. The first hour passed. The starters came and went. Conversation rose and settled in the way it does when the room is full and comfortable and slightly lubricated with good wine. Eleanor circulated, table to table, greeting, air-kissing, deploying the full 30 years of practiced social ease that made her excellent at these events. Amy was radiant in a green dress, the holly ring on her left hand catching the candlelight with extraordinary effect. Eleanor had positioned the ring well. It was the visual centerpiece of the evening without anyone having to say so explicitly. At approximately 8:15, the main course was on the table and the room had found its rhythm. Lucas stood up. He picked up his wine glass and tapped it lightly with a knife. The room quieted with the particular attentiveness of an audience that has been well fed and is now ready for the emotional content. Lucas is charming. He is charming in the performed surface way of a man who has been told his entire life that everything he does is wonderful. And the tragedy of that particular kind of charm is that it works in rooms exactly like this one, warm, willing, already disposed to celebrate. He opened with a self-deprecating joke about his nerves. The room laughed. He thanked Amy's family, looked directly at the Hendersons, acknowledged their graciousness, praised Amy in the specific rehearsed way of a man who has practiced this speech in the mirror. He talked about love as the real inheritance. He talked about generations and legacy. He held up Amy's hand, the hand wearing the holly ring, and said in the tone of a man delivering the climactic line of a prepared performance, "This ring is a symbol of that legacy. 3 generations of love right here on Amy's finger where it belongs." Eleanor was beaming from the head table. She was the picture of a woman who had authored this exact moment and was receiving precisely the recognition she had arranged for herself. Her expression was the expression of someone who has won. I looked at my phone under the table. I opened the group chat. I pressed send. 50 phones received the message simultaneously. The sound was not dramatic in the way you might imagine. Not a single loud alert but a cascade, a soft rolling wave of notification chimes moving through the room from table to table, pocket to purse. One guest then another glancing downward then going still. Lucas was still speaking when the first 3 or 4 people looked at their screens. He noticed the shift in the room's attention, that particular microflicker of a performer registering that the audience has moved, and his voice wavered slightly before he rallied. Then more phones lit up. Then someone at the back set their phone face up on the table and did not pick it up again. Then Amy's mother, Patricia Henderson, looked down at her screen, and I watched her face change in the precise way a face changes when it reads something that reclassifies the entire room it is sitting in. The message read, "Amy, the ring on your finger is stolen property. It was legally bequeathed to me in my grandmother's notarized will, catalogued by the estate executor on October 19th, and removed from the estate without authorization by my mother on November 3rd. Attached are the relevant clause from the will naming me as sole owner, a text message from my mother dated November 6th in which she explicitly confesses to taking it, and a formal legal demand letter from the estate's attorney. You have 24 hours to surrender the ring to Executor Marcus at the contact information provided in the letter. Failure to comply will result in a police report being filed and the ring being recovered as evidence of grand larceny in the first degree. I am sorry that you are in this position. This is not about you." 3 attachments. Loading on every screen in the room. Lucas stopped speaking. The silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of a pause in a toast. It was the specific, total, pressurized silence of 50 people simultaneously reading something that cannot be unread. You could hear the candlelight. You could hear the soft movement of the catering staff who had not yet been made aware that the room had transformed. Amy looked down at her phone. She read it. She looked at her left hand. She looked at Lucas, who was standing at the front of the room holding his wine glass with no speech left to give and no narrative left to manage. Then she looked at her mother. Richard Henderson set his napkin on the table. He stood up slowly with the deliberateness of a man who does not make sudden movements because he does not need to. He looked at Lucas across the room, not with anger because anger implies surprise, and Richard Henderson did not appear surprised, with the expression of a man who has reclassified a situation and is now deciding what to do about it. He said quietly enough that only the nearby tables could hear, but in a tone that carried, "Is this accurate?" It was not a question. It was an assessment. Lucas said, There's context." Richard Henderson said, "Is this accurate?" Eleanor was on her feet. She had read the message. She was moving across the room toward my table and her face was doing something I had never seen it do. It was losing its composure in real time, the 30-year-old architecture of careful social management cracking under the weight of 50 phones displaying her own words. He said my name. The maternal command voice that had produced compliance for 29 years. I looked at her. I did not stand up. I said, "Everything in that message is documented. Uncle Marcus's number is in the demand letter." She said, "You are destroying this family." I said, "Eleanor, your confession text is on everyone's phone right now, including the Hendersons." The woman seated immediately to my left, a country club friend of Eleanor's named Barbara, someone I had known peripherally at holiday parties since I was 12 years old, quietly pushed her chair back 6 inches from the table. Not dramatically, quietly. That 6-inch movement told me more about how the room had read the message than anything else that happened that evening. Amy had taken the ring off. She was holding it in her closed right hand, staring at it with the expression of someone who has just discovered that an object has a history she was not told. She was crying, not theatrically, but the specific quiet crying of a person who is genuinely blindsided and genuinely does not know what to do. I felt for her. I want to say that clearly. Amy had done nothing wrong. She had accepted a gift from someone she trusted in good faith, because she had no reason to ask where it came from. She was collateral in a crime someone else had committed. Eleanor turned to the room, to her country club friends, to the extended family, to the assembled company who had come to eat good food and celebrate a nice engagement, and attempted to reframe. She said something about how Chloe had been struggling, about how this was a family situation and not what it looked like, about how there were circumstances that explained everything. Her voice was doing something it had never done in my presence. It was uncertain. She was improvising in a room full of people who were looking at a notarized legal document on their phones. And improvisation does not compete with documentation. One of Eleanor's country club friends, a woman I will not name who had been laughing with Eleanor 90 minutes earlier about a charity auction, looked up from her phone and then looked carefully away, in the specific way that people look carefully away when they have decided that a social situation is no longer theirs to manage and they would like not to be associated with the party who is currently melting down. Amy's uncle, a broad man in a dark suit who had been at the bar earlier, had moved to stand behind the Hendersons. He was not doing anything. He was just standing there, in the way that large men sometimes make their presence known without taking any direct action. Richard Henderson had turned away from Lucas entirely and was speaking in a low voice to his wife. The conversation between them lasted approximately 45 seconds and appeared to reach a conclusion. Lucas was trying to intercept Richard Henderson. He was saying something about the ring being a gift, about good intentions, about family. Richard Henderson walked past him to where Amy was standing, put his hand briefly on her shoulder, and said something to her that I could not hear. Amy nodded. She opened her hand and looked at the ring one more time and then she held it out, not to Lucas, not to Eleanor, and asked in a voice that was quiet and clear and absolutely firm, who she should give this to. I said, Marcus's address and number are in the letter. Call him first thing tomorrow. He'll arrange everything. She nodded. She put the ring in her evening bag. I stood up. I took my wallet out of my bag and put $100 bill on the table for my starter and my water. I put on my coat. I walked toward the exit. I passed Lucas, who said my name with the tone of a man who is used to that tone producing a result and is discovering for the first time that it doesn't. I walked past Eleanor, who was standing in the center of her $15,000 room surrounded by 50 people and their loaded phones, and who looked for the first time in my memory like a woman who has run out of moves. I paused at Amy's table for 2 seconds and I said, I'm sorry this landed on you. You have the attorney's information. Please use it. And then I walked through the Whitmore's lobby, past the maitre d', who was holding very still in the professional way of someone who has overheard something significant and decided not to acknowledge it, through the front doors and into the cold December air. I sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes. Not from emotion, I was not emotional. I sat because I was tired in the specific clean way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally set it down. Then I started the car and drove home. Amy called Marcus at 8:47 the following morning. She had the number from the demand letter. She was professional and composed and made no attempt to negotiate or delay. She arranged a handoff at Marcus's office that same afternoon and surrendered the ring in person, still in the evening bag from the night before. Marcus documented the return, provided a receipt and told her she had done the right thing. I was told secondhand that he was almost warm about it, which is about the most Marcus can be. I want to say something about Amy here because she deserves it. She had done nothing wrong. She accepted a gift from people she had every reason to trust in a context, an engagement, where receiving a family heirloom as a ring is normal and even meaningful. She had no knowledge of the will, no knowledge of the inventory, no knowledge of the spare key or the November 3rd entry. She was given a story by people she trusted and had no reason to interrogate it. The moment she understood the actual situation, she acted with complete integrity. She called Marcus without being told to. She surrendered the ring without negotiation. She did not attempt to reframe or minimize. I have no grievance with Amy. If anything, I respected her considerably more after that phone call than I had known her well enough to respect before it. The engagement ended that week. Amy's family did not issue a statement or generate public drama. They simply withdrew, cleanly, completely, and permanently. Richard Henderson made several phone calls in the days following the dinner, to people in his social circle, to the broader network that Eleanor had spent 30 years trying to access through exactly these kinds of social engagements. And what he said in those calls I cannot tell you precisely, but the effect was measurable. Social reputations in tight communities are not destroyed by arguments or scandals in the way people imagine. They are eroded by the specific quiet repositioning that happens when credible, respected people revise their assessments and pass that revision along. Word of the demand letter, of Eleanor's text confession, of the Ring doorbell footage, of the country club dinner and what had happened in it, moved through the relevant networks with the efficiency that fully documented true stories always move. Eleanor's circle did not confront her. They simply became unavailable, one by one, in the gradual, devastating way that the loss of social standing actually happens. Lucas had placed $22,000 in non-refundable deposits on a wedding venue and a catering company. The venue contract was explicit. No refunds past the 60-day cancellation window, and he was well past that window. The catering company offered a credit valid for 18 months, which was a generous policy that served him no practical use as a single man with no income sufficient to host an event and no fiancé to plan one with. $22,000, gone. What Lucas was left with, ultimately, was a full accounting of who he actually was without the scaffolding. No Eleanor to absorb the consequences. No Henderson family to elevate his social position. No ring to tell a better story with. No fiancé. No wedding. No inheritance, because Marcus's estate distribution was complete and clean, with every asset going to its lawful recipient, and there was nothing left for Eleanor to redirect to him even if she had wanted to. The country club crowd who had toasted him on December 14th had watched his mother's text confession light up their phones at his own engagement dinner, and social memory is long in the specific communities where everyone has known everyone for 30 years. His reputation in those circles was not repaired. It was not repaired because there was no repairing it. There was only time, and even time cannot fully dissolve the specific kind of embarrassment that 50 witnesses carry away from a room. Eleanor's situation was more formal and more permanent. Marcus filed the police report the morning of December 15th. He submitted the Ring doorbell footage, the signed inventory from October 19th, the appraised value documentation, and Eleanor's text message. The detective assigned to the case told Marcus it was one of the cleanest estate theft submissions he had processed. There was no ambiguity, no conflicting evidence, no period of investigation where the outcome was uncertain. The evidence package was self-contained and complete. Eleanor was contacted within 2 weeks. She retained a criminal defense attorney. The retainer was $35,000. The attorney reviewed the evidence and advised Eleanor to negotiate. This is what attorneys do when the evidence is airtight and the client has a text confession on record. They advise a plea. There was no courtroom. There was no dramatic cross-examination, no opportunity for Eleanor to perform her narrative or manage the optics. There was a conference room, a prosecutor, her attorney, and a set of documented facts that left no interpretive space. She entered a guilty plea to a reduced charge. She received a suspended sentence. She paid a fine and was placed on probation. Her criminal record from that date forward existed. Marcus then invoked the penalty clause. Eleanor's share of Grand's estate was $300,000. The penalty clause disinheritance was automatic upon documented proof of interference. The theft was documented. The confession was documented. The plea was documented. Marcus's fiduciary duty was to the estate, not to Eleanor's feelings about the outcome, and he executed that duty with the precision of a man who has spent 30 years doing exactly this kind of work. $300,000 voided. Gone. To cover the $35,000 attorney retainer and subsequent legal costs, Eleanor remortgaged her home. The house she had owned outright. The centerpiece of her financial stability and, perhaps more importantly to a woman whose identity is built around her material position, the address that had anchored her social standing for 25 years. She had entered December 14th as a woman hosting a $15,000 celebration dinner at a country club. She exited the month with a criminal record, a mortgage she had not had 30 days earlier, no inheritance, and an ex-daughter-in-law's family who were no longer reachable. I blocked Eleanor's phone number on the morning of December 15th. I blocked her email. I blocked every account I was aware of on every platform. I did the same for Lucas. I wrote a single brief factual letter to the family members I genuinely cared about. An aunt, 2 cousins, explaining that I was severing contact with Eleanor and Lucas permanently and that I wished them well individually and would not be revisiting the decision. I put the letters in the mail, closed my laptop, and opened a real estate browser. I had an inheritance to spend. If this story gave you the specific kind of satisfaction that comes from watching someone who used a person's grief as a weapon discover that the person they underestimated had been building a case the entire time, subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Drop a comment below and tell me whether you believe, like I do, that documentation beats drama every single time. And if you are the one in your family who handles everything, absorbs everything, and gets handed, "You'll be fine, you're strong," while someone else gets handed the actual thing, this channel is for you. The next story is already written. In the last week of February, I drove north. 6 hours by myself with a short list of 4 properties and a cashier's check in my bag that represented a portion of the inheritance Marcus had distributed without incident, because there was no longer a competing claimant and no legal encumbrance on the estate's clean resolution. The full inheritance was mine. The ring, my portion of the liquid assets, the share Gran had earmarked for me over years of careful estate planning. Eleanor's $300,000 did not pass to me. It went back into the estate and was redistributed according to the will's provisions. I did not want Eleanor's money. I had what was mine. The coastal town I had chosen was a place I had visited once with Daniel years before the accident, in the early and uncomplicated part of our life together when we used to drive places on impulse and stay in small hotels and eat at the first restaurant we could find. He had pointed at the coastline from the passenger window and said something about how he could live somewhere like this. I had agreed in the way you agree to things that seem hypothetical and pleasant when you are in your mid-20s and the future feels like an open field. That conversation had sat in my memory for 3 years. I was not trying to retrace it. I was not doing something symbolic. I was buying a house in a town where I had once been happy and where I had reason to believe I could be happy again. That is all it was. I think Gran would have approved of the pragmatism. The house I chose is small. Smaller than my apartment in the city, which surprised me. But what I found standing in 4 different properties over 2 days was that what I wanted was not size. It was quality of quiet. The house I chose is gray painted, sits 3 blocks from the water, has a porch that faces southwest and catches the late afternoon light at an angle that makes the whole front of the house glow for about 40 minutes around 4 o'clock, and has a kitchen window above the sink that frames a specific oak tree in the neighbor's yard that I decided, on first sight, I wanted to watch through every season. I paid cash. The closing took 3 weeks. The previous owners left the porch furniture because they were moving to a smaller place and it wouldn't fit. I took this as a reasonable sign. On the day I got the keys, I drove up alone with my car packed with the things I was keeping and the things I had bought specifically for this house. I let myself in through the front door and stood in the empty living room for about 10 minutes, doing nothing in particular. Just standing in the first home I had ever owned in a town where I knew no one. In a life that was finally, completely, structurally mine. I unpacked what I needed that first night. The bed, the coffee machine, 1 lamp, 1 mug. The boxes in the second bedroom could wait. I had nowhere to be. The holly ring is on my right hand now. My grandmother wore it on her right hand for 60 years. It fits as if it was made for this specific hand, which of course it was not. But there are small, unremarkable coincidences that feel, if you are inclined toward them, like acknowledgments. I am inclined toward them now in a way I was not 3 years ago. On the first morning I made coffee, carried the mug outside, and sat in the gray February light on the porch furniture the previous owners had left behind. The water was visible over the rooftops at the end of the street. A fishing boat moved across the far edge of the horizon in the kind of slow, purposeful way that makes distance feel restful rather than empty. The holly ring caught the pale winter light. I looked at it for a while. A voicemail notification arrived. Unknown number, routed through a gap in my blocking that I had not yet located. I did not listen to it. The app generated an automatic transcript. A preview of something about trying to reach me, please just, and I pressed delete before the second sentence loaded. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction particularly. With the specific and settled decisiveness of someone who has made a decision and sees no reason to revisit it. I finished my coffee. The fishing boat disappeared behind the horizon. I went inside and started on the boxes. Here is what I know now, 2 years after the accident and 6 months after the dinner. There are people in the world who will take what is yours and justify it with your own pain. They will hold your grief up as evidence of your incompetence. They will decide without asking you that the hardest thing you have ever survived makes you undeserving of the things that belong to you. They will do this confidently, smoothly, and with complete certainty that you are too depleted to respond, because in their experience depleted people comply and you have always complied before, and there is no reason from where they are standing to believe this time is different. What they do not account for is the executor, the inventory, the time-stamped footage, the attorney on retainer, the unsent message in a group chat containing every single person in the room. What they do not account for is the woman who, when she finally decides to fight back, does not fight with emotion. She fights with documentation, and she waits for the exact right moment to press send. Documentation beats drama. It does. Every single time. And the ring, the one my grandmother chose for me, the one with the holly and the rubies and the emerald-cut diamond that no living jeweler can replicate, it looks exactly right on my right hand in the gray coastal morning light. Looks like it was always going to end up here.